Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. When you're serious about reading fantasy, which, in case you hadn't noticed by now, I am, there are a bunch of top-tier authors you simply have to have read. Among them are Brandon Sanderson, Stephen Erikson, Robin Hobb, George R.R. Martin, Robert Jordan, and Joe Abercrombie. I still come up short in that respect because I haven't read anything by Erikson and Martin yet. But from now on, I can say that I have read Joe Abercrombie. On January 29, I started reading The Blade itself, the first book in his extremely popular First Law series. I needed 16 days to get through the 550 pages, which in this case says something about my enjoyment of the novel. Before I go into that, let me say a few words about anticipation. On BookTube, I've watched many content creators gush about Joe Abercrombie and specifically his First Law trilogy. It holds high spots in top 10 lists, and across the board the praise is overwhelming. So one can imagine I was pumped to finally start with this trilogy, expecting nothing less than a great reading experience. And having gone off to a great start to this reading year, I was more than ready to add another great read to the pile. However, here are some of the notes I wrote in the margins of this book, starting on page 25. Very skilled writer. Characters are thought through. Story as of yet unclear. Page 71. Nice up until now, although I'm not invested in any of it yet. Page 92. This book has an extremely slow start. Page 136. Still cannot get into the book. Page 162. There is hardly any direction to the story. Glokta as well as Logan doing stuff without any goal, it seems. Page 279. The high build-up of anticipation because of BookTube is not coming true so far. I cannot determine how much disappointed expectation plays a part here, but what I do know is that my reading experience mismatched these expectations, to say the least. There are different storylines that follow characters like Logan Ninefingers, who comes into contact with Bayaz, the first of the mages, Sand Dan Glokta, Jezal Dan Luthar, and Logan's buddies under leadership of Three Trees. These different POVs are seemingly unrelated to one another, and also their stories themselves don't seem to be going anywhere as well. Everyone's motive remains shrouded in mystery. Because I am a story-first reader, this book was not an unforgettable experience. That doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. Abercrombie's characters are highly memorable and relatable, even though they are not likable in the least. Except for Logan, perhaps all of the main characters are flawed. The one with the most depth to me is Sand Dan Glokta, who has a successful history as a hero warrior, but after 2 years of harsh torture is now reduced to a cripple who is in constant pain. His cynicism, nihilism, and dark wit are extremely well portrayed. He is the only character whose inner monologues we get to read. The interrogation techniques applied by Glokta, the way he incites fear into his victims, is both terrifying and entertaining at the same time. The numbness of Glokta's feelings is perfectly illustrated in many instances. When someone intentionally slams the door shut with a loud bang, Glokta was intended to jump, but couldn't be bothered. Or Glokta's incessant questioning about why he is doing what he is doing. His actions imply total obedience to his superior, but In the meantime, we don't really know where his allegiance lies, supposing he has any. In a conversation with West, who knew Glokta in his heydays as a warrior hero, West asks where that Glokta has gone. Dead. And what remains? A fucking ruin with his name. A limping, skulking shadow. A crippled ghost, clinging to life the way the smell of piss clings to a beggar. About Logan, we learn how tired he is of violence, even though he is a ruthless fighting machine when pushed. He struggles internally between the desire for peace and the necessity of violence if he is to survive. His tiredness regarding killing is almost tangible. Fights might find Logan depressingly often, but he was long past looking for them. There is no clear-cut division between good and evil in the world Abercrombie creates. The Union, the North, and the Gurkish in the South represent completely different civilizations. One is not inherently better than the other, at least as far as I could tell from this first book. That Abercrombie is a very skilled writer is immediately clear. Right away on page 2, we get a sense of the sort of humour many readers like so much from this writer. It had seemed a clever notion to pitch camp near the gorge. No chance of anyone sneaking up behind. Now, as Logan slid over the edge of the cliff on his belly, the idea lost much of its appeal. Most of the humour and irony is found in the dialogue, which is dark and witty at the same time. The banter adds some lightness onto the grim reality of the world the characters inhabit. Even though the pick-up ability of this book was low throughout the entire book, I did enjoy Abercrombie's prose. He used to be a better man, but crowns sit badly on some people. Without exception, the dialogues between adversaries are strong. When Bethold's son Calder comes to Bayaz with orders from his father, Bayaz says, "Tell your father he must come himself. I do not waste my time on fools and younger sons. I'm old-fashioned in this. I like to talk to the horse's head, not the horse's ass." When J.R.R. Luthar is introduced to a lady at court, their conversation is going nowhere. The conversation hovered over the abyss. And another good example of his excellent writing skills, Salt poured himself into his tall chair in one smooth motion. The cynicism is remarkable at times, like when J.R.R. is observing King Gustav V. His head was slumped sideways, squashed down under the sparkling crown. His pasty, pale fingers twitched on his crimson silk mantle like white slugs. His eyes were closed, chest rising and falling gently, accompanied by gentle splutterings as spittle issued from his slack lips and ran down his chin, joining the sweat on his bulging jowls and helping it to turn his high collar dark with wet. Truly, J.R.R. was in the presence of greatness. So there is nothing wrong with the prose whatsoever. On the contrary, I really liked it. But the absence of an overlapping story became a nuisance in the end. When Logan decides to follow the mage, Bayaz, he insists on not wanting to know the goal of their quest. Not only is this a little bit unrealistic in my eyes, it's also frustrating that the reason for reading all these pages is withheld from me. Again. The lack of story reminds me of the time I turned lectures of speakers into articles. One speaker in particular was very good at capturing the attention of the audience. His swift thinking and originality was unprecedented. But when I sat down and listened to the tape of his speech to turn it into a sensible article, I realized that all he had said on stage was mainly baked air. His story had no basis, there was no overarching thought or message. His performance was merely a series of quick explosions, without much coherence. Listening back, His promises of great insights were delivered nowhere. Reading The Blade itself left me with this same empty feeling. Absolutely loved the writing, the depth of thought by some of the characters, and the humour. For instance, I love the signature lines each major character has. Logan says, "You have to be realistic about these things," or "I'm still alive." And Glocta says, "Why do I do this? I could stop any day. I could go home to Mother. But then what? Then what?" But the lack of direction or meaning to the events described was discouraging. The extremely thin veils that were lifted only led me to believe that the next books might deliver on the promise of a true story. Like the visit to the mysterious house of the Maker, this is definitely a highlight for me in the book, because all of a sudden the story seems to be gaining momentum. I finally got a sense of being dragged into a story, even though I'd had to wait 400 pages for it. We learn a lot about the ancient world and its legendary leaders, but then the rapids die down again and we're back to the loosely connected scenes of loosely connected characters. So far, 350 pages into the second book, I cannot say this has happened yet. Logan and Bayaz are still on their quest, but the reader doesn't know where they're going or what they're about to do there. The lack of a map of the world is not helping either in this respect. Sure, the author has released more snippets of the real story, but they are nothing more than that, snippets. I still don't know what greater picture all of the different storylines are leading up to, but I trust that the overall praise for this series on BookTube has to be based on something. In conclusion, my first time reading Joe Abercrombie left me somewhat disappointed. I find that The Blade itself is constructed in a crafty way, and the book got better with each chapter I read. The characters and world building are intriguing and very enjoyable. However, the biggest letdown is the extremely slow development of the plot, if any. After more than 800 entertaining pages by now, I'm still left with nothing more than the promise of a great story. For a teaser, that is truly way too long, unless the ending is so overwhelmingly huge that it makes me forget the journey I had to get there instantly. I find it very difficult to give this first book a rating. It seems to me that I have to have read all 3 books before I can see how everything fits. So, in my upcoming video on the trilogy as a whole, I will get back to you on that one. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again, at Dutch Greybeard.